welcome to the granny hair kerchief tutorial. There's a few things that we need to get started: a 6.5mm crochet hook, some medium 4-weighted yarn. I used 4 colors, scissors, and a yarn needle for weaving in ends if you need it. We're gonna start out by creating one granny square with 3 different rows. I chose to do a different color each row, so you start out with a slip knot, chain 4, and we're going to enter our hook into the first chain that we made with a slip stitch. You're going to chain 3, DC 2 into the hole in the middle, then chain 2, DC another 3 into the middle to create your second DC cluster, chain 2, DC another 3 into that center, chain 2, and DC your last 3. Chain 2, and then slip stitch to create your first layer. Cut your working yarn, chain 2, and then pull that down to secure that end. We're going to continue by creating our next layer of our granny square by entering our hook into any corner and creating a double knot. Now we're going to chain 3 and DC 2 into that same stitch. Chain 2 and make another DC cluster. Make another DC cluster in the next corner. Chain 2. Make another DC cluster in that same corner. Repeat this for the other 2 corners and slip stitch at the beginning to finish off the row. And I'm going to fasten off the same way by cutting the working yarn, chaining 2, and pulling that down to create a knot. Now you're going to do the same thing that we did on the previous row, but you're going to use your next color. You are going to be doing a DC cluster in the middle space as well as the 2 clusters in each of the corners. All the way around until you reach the end of the round, and you're going to join at the beginning with a slip stitch as you did the previous round. Fastening off the same way that we did the last 2 rounds with chaining 2 and pulling that knot down. Next we're going to be creating 2 triangle pieces, which is going to be half of the granny square that we already made. You can see here that if you were to put this square in half, it will obviously create a little triangle. So we're going to replicate what this looks like, but by creating 2 separate triangles. We're going to start out the same way by creating a You're going to chain 4 and you're going to enter your hook into that first chain with a slip stitch. You're going to chain 3 and then you're going to DC 2 into that center hole. Chain 2 and then do another DC cluster. Instead of finishing this off with the other 2 clusters, since it is a half square or a triangle, we're going to stop there at just doing those 2 DC clusters. DC, and we're going to create our DC cluster at that very edge. It's not going to be in necessarily a chain space, but it's going to be on the edge there. Then we're going to go into that chain space and do 2 DC clusters because that is our corner, and making sure to put the chain 2 between those 2 clusters as we did in the square. And then you're going to finish off by doing the same thing that you did on the first DC cluster, but by entering the hook into the last stitch of the row instead of a chain space. And this is what that should look like. We're going to repeat what we did in the previous round by entering our hook in that first DC and acting like that is a chain space for our first DC cluster of this round. We're going to DC cluster in the next space, and then we're going to do the 2 DC clusters with the chain spaces in between for our corner space, and then repeat what we just did for the last 2 chain spaces as well. You're going to repeat this process and create another triangle for the other side. The next video is going to show you how you should be joining the squares together with the continuous join as you go method. So we're going to join our yarn in the top right corner of the top right triangle. We're going to chain 3 and DC 2 into that same space. DC 3 into the next space. DC 3 in the middle, DC 3 in the next space, DC 3 in the other corner of that triangle. the top part of that top right triangle, and we're going to go down the left side, and then we're going to go back and join with the other side. So now we're going to chain 2 and finish off that corner with a DC cluster, and we're going to continue with DC clusters down until the next corner. Cluster in this corner, and we're going to be chaining 2 and joining in, you can see right there, that corner of the square. So chain 2, and then we're going to DC directly into that next corner of the square. Do 2 more DCs, and now we're going to be going backwards, and we're going to slip stitch into the side of the triangle that we just did. So we're going to slip stitch, DC cluster, slip stitch, and then DC cluster, slip stitch, DC cluster, slip stitch. I will never stop raving about this way of joining. I really dislike sewing, and I love being able to do the final round of the granny square and the joining round at the same time. So you can see this is what it looks like, and I'm just going to finish off by doing the last DC cluster in this corner. So now you can see that we've done this side, and we're going to finish off with regular DCs here, and then we're going to join the other triangle exactly like we did last time, and then finish off the rest of the large triangle with regular DC clusters all the way around. So we're just going to continue with regular DC clusters all the way until the next corner, and remember we're only going to be doing 1 DC cluster and chaining 2, and then joining in the bottom of the next triangle. Cluster on this side, and we're going to chain 2 and then join directly into this bottom corner with a DC. So we're going to chain 2 and then DC into that bottom corner and follow that with 2 other DCs to create our DC cluster. Slip stitch across the way, DC cluster in the next space, and we're going to continue this all the way until you finish this side of the triangle. finish off that last corner with a DC cluster, and then you're going to slip stitch to create the end of this joining round. Slip stitch into that area where we made the chain 2 spaces before we join the next panel, and then you're going to continue with regular DCs along that round. DC cluster in the very top right corner where we started, and then chain 2 and join back in where we started to finish off that round. So it's a little wonky, so we're going to chain 1 and then half double crochet in each of the stitches, not the chain spaces but the stitches, to create a more uniform and straight line. When you reach the middle, you're going to triple crochet into the middle stitches. If we were to half double crochet, it will not create a straight line here because it does have a little bit of a dip. So that's why I chose to do 2 triple crochets to kind of even it out. You're going to finish off by half double crocheting all the way until the end, and we're going to be adding 3 triple crochets in each of the corners, the top left, the middle bottom, and the top right. Now you're going to turn your work over and slip stitch about like 1 or 2 stitches until you get to that little corner space, and then we're going to be chaining around 55 or however long you want your strands of your hair kerchief to be. 55 was pretty comfortable for me to be able to tie a bow, but it's totally your preference. Secure your yarn, or chain 2 whatever number you did on the other side, whatever is most comfortable for your head size. The last thing to do is to weave in all of your ends, and if you wanted to add like scalloped edging or another detailing stitch on the outside, you totally can. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to tag me in any creations that you guys do. I would love to see them. And you can follow me on Instagram, and make sure to like and subscribe.